all these glaciers were a part of an ice sheet about 600,000 years ago that was about 1.5 miles thick and went hundreds of miles out into the ocean.
Flying above and certainly landing on top of a glacier,
it all kind of looks like this when you go that direction.
Makes it impossible to ignore the changes happening in America's fastest warming state.
If you listen closely, you can hear that water flowing, water that is melting ice from glaciers like the Knik Glacier. The United States and Canada account for about half of the world's glacial loss. And some of this is natural, but a recent study found that glaciers like this Knik Glacier are melting 30% faster than they were just 15 years ago. That part is not natural. That part is climate change. And Alaska is actually the place in the world that is seeing more glacial loss than anywhere else.
It's the loss of critical fresh water spilling into our oceans. It's the loss of the delicate balance of ecosystems. And it's also the loss of something even children can recognize.
I mean, as a climate scientist, but also as a father, that has to be kind of a sad thing to hear them notice that.
You know, it is. But kind of sadly, it's just become part of, just as kids grow up and they look different every year, the glaciers grow down and they look different every year. And it almost becomes part of it almost feels like an inevitable thing where the kids grow up and the glaciers melt away. Sometimes you have to remind yourself that, one of those is natural and the other really isn't.
Climate scientists around the world keep sounding the alarm. Humans are warming the planet. The effects are here. The effects are visible, from Alaska's Arctic glaciers to Florida's tropical islands.
As the most recent IPCC report came out and said, we don't have decades. We hardly have years as a society. We've kind of down to hours now. Because if we don't turn it around, it's going to be we're not going to be able to recover from it.
But it doesn't take a climate scientist to see what's happening. Virtually any Alaskan, anyone, can see it.
Yeah, so all these chunks down here have come off, been calved off or broken off from the main part of the toe of this glacier here.
The biggest change that I've noticed in my time here has most certainly been in the ice. I've seen all of our glaciers change.
But this is an important point, maybe the most important point. We don't have to view climate change as an impossible obstacle. It's actually quite the opposite.
I grew up with John F. Kennedy saying, there's this big light out there every night. It's called the moon. We need to put a man on that moon. And they did that. We can do that with climate change. We can see it as an opportunity.
As Greta Thunberg says, the one thing we need more than hope is action. Because when we act, hope is all around us.
This is Katharine Hayhoe, climate scientist and author of Saving Us, a book that's about how to talk to people who may not agree about the reality of climate change.
One of the biggest challenges we have when it comes to climate change is that the images that pop into our head are typically of things that are far away from us. A glacier, a polar bear, an iceberg. The reality is, wherever we live today, climate change is already affecting us. Someone asked me the other day, how do you talk about polar bears in Iowa? And I said, you don't. You talk about the heavy rain and the floods. How do you talk about climate change in Texas? How do you talk about polar bears in Texas? You don't. You talk about rising seas and sinking coastlines. You talk about stronger droughts. You talk about crazy heat. And you talk about the fact that Texas is #1 in the country in wind energy, #2 in solar. How do we talk about climate change? We talk about it here, we talk about it now, and we talk about it in ways that are relevant to our lives.